Thank you, Mr. Bhatnagar. Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to this special function, which is jointly being organized by the International House of University of Chicago and IAFA. First, let me wish you all a very happy, healthy, happening, productive, and memorable 2023. We are grateful to all for coming here. Our special thanks and appreciation, gratitude is reserved for Ambassador Vardhan Shringla, who is currently the Chief Coordinator of India's G20 Presidency, and a busy person. But I must also thank, we are fortunate to have amongst you the senior-most diplomat of India, Ambassador Maharaj Krishna Rasgotra, and Dr. Sonal Mansingh, Padma Vibhushan Member of Parliament. We also have amongst us many senior diplomats. His Excellency Ambassador of EU is here, Ambassador of Indonesia is here. We are expecting Ambassador of Italy to come here. We have diplomat from Russian Embassy. We have the Austrian High Commission. The Mexican CDA is here. I would also like to welcome among guests the former Foreign Secretary, Ambassador Kamal Sibbal, and Director General of IDSA, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy. Each and every one of you is welcome. The former Information Advisor to Prime Minister Bajpayee, H.K. Dua Saab is here. He's an old friend. We have been working for many, many years. And this is a program which basically 3 in 1. First is to celebrate G20 presidency, which I don't have to say anything. You have the chief coordinator, he will tell you. But while unveiling the logo of the G20, as well as his speech in Bali, Prime Minister has already painted a very grand vision for G20, what India can do, what kind of paradigm shift it can bring, which could be good only not for G20 members, but also for the rest of the world. But I must really quote one statement recently made by the visiting CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, about G20. He said, "This is India's moment. It's a story that needs to be written about. The story needs to be talked about so that everyone else in the world can also benefit from it. India's leadership of G20 is a great moment to do that." Rest I will leave to Ambassador Shringla. Second is to celebrate India-US relations. Again, Ambassador Shringla has been ambassador to USA. He was foreign secretary, so he knows more than what I can say. I will simply say it has become a cliche to say that India-US relations have never been better. But there's a lot of truth in that. I don't know how many of you recognize that as early as August 14, 2010, I had organized a discussion on the hall, conference hall 2, just above the dining hall. And the theme was, is India-US strategic partnership a mere pipe dream? Question mark. And who was chairing that discussion? Ambassador Maharaj Krishna Rasgotra. And the panels included late Ambassador Brajesh Mishra, Ambassador Lalit Mansingh, Ambassador Kamal Sibbal, Professor Amitabh Mattu, Kiran Karnik, Don Lu. That was 12 years back. But today we can say, remove that question mark. There is no doubt this is reality. We are a strategic partner, we are defense partner, we are major trading partner, and all those things which Ambassador Shringla will tell. I was just reading figure that USA is overtaking China as becoming the largest trading part of India. The second part is celebrating the 90th birth anniversary of International House. It's a great institution, it's a great movement, and I have a very fond memory of having organized many functions there. I still remember just 5 weeks after September 11, 2001, terror attack, the Twin Tower in New York, we had discussion on is relevance of Gandhian thought after September 11, 2001. And Dr. Lawrence Carter, Dean of Martin Luther King Jr. Chapel from Atlanta came and he spoke about that. And we had a reception for Dev Anand. He's the only film personality of India ever been felicitated at Interest House of Chicago. And she will tell more about this. And lastly, Chicago University. This university recently got 97th Nobel Prize. How many universities in the world have 97 Nobel Prize, this university? And we have a long association with so many professors. Know what we used to have late Professor Rudolph Lloyd, Susan Lloyd. We used to have Professor Ralph Nicholas. He is still there. He used to be president of India, American Institute of Indian Studies. And of course, we have Professor Raghuraj Raman, who was the governor of RBI. Without further ado, I will welcome you all once again and invite Dr. Dennis Jorgen to make her remarks. Over to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Surendra, and welcome, and thank you all for joining us tonight for this special program. It is so good to be back together in person after this long gap. This program is a collaboration, as Surendra Kumar said, between the Indo-American Friendship Association here in New Delhi and International House at the University of Chicago. This year, International House of Chicago, also as mentioned, is celebrating an important milestone, our 90th anniversary. The first house was established in New York City in 1924, and today there are 15 houses around the world on 4 continents. International House was founded by John D. Rockefeller Jr. in 1932. From the day International House opened its doors, our mission has been to promote cross-cultural understanding, mutual respect, and friendship among students and scholars, and on the part of the people of metropolitan Chicago and the broader communities we serve toward individuals of all nations and backgrounds. It is through the International House student life experience and our internationally focused public programming, such as this evening's event, International House is dedicated to transforming people's lives for a better world. This mission is then further extended through the International House's worldwide organization, which is, as I mentioned, a network of 15 houses on 4 continents. I'm leaving on Thursday to join the International House in Japan to celebrate their 70th anniversary. We invite you all to join us throughout the coming year, either at International House on our campus in Chicago or through our virtual programs and other online gatherings for many of our other Global Voices Performing Arts and Lecture Series, which is the umbrella program for all of these internationally focused activities. Information about these programs is available on our website, and there are a number of our annual reports available for pickup. On the occasion of our 90th anniversary celebration, we couldn't be more thrilled to partner with the Indo-American Friendship Association, an organization for which we have a very long-standing relationship. On behalf of the Global International House community and the Indo-American Friendship Association, I want to welcome you again and thank you for joining us. Please enjoy the program. And now, before I turn the... Go ahead.
Yeah, so I request Dr. Denise Jorgen to felicitate Dr. M.
This is a small memento.
Yeah, MC must control, yeah. I invite Dr. Ambassador Surinder Kumar to introduce Ambassador Shringla.
Ambassador Shringla needs no introduction. There's a bio-profile in the program which you can read in much detail. I will just have few lines that he was Foreign Secretary. He was our ambassador in USA. He was ambassador in Thailand. He was a High Commissioner in Dhaka. He was our Consul General in Durban and also in Ho Chi Minh City. And he has handled all kind of multilateral diplomatic assignments and other assignments. He was also involved in organizing the Howdy Modi, that big thing which we had during Donald Trump's time, which 50,000 plus people came there. And now this is the onerous task of chief coordinator of G20. It is a huge, huge task. I still remember when I was deputy secretary, we had non-aligned summit and Chogam summit. I talk about 82, 83. That time, 94 heads of state. That time, we didn't have all the gizmos. We didn't have all the smartphones. We didn't have all the fact is MEA people, same foreign service people, really did a tremendous job. And I'm sure this G20 under his able leadership and so many agencies involved, which are really involved in this coordination, will be a great success. But more than that, I will request him to tell this audience, enlightened audience, what are the priorities for India's presidency? What is on the agenda? Where is this movement going to? Because there are so many nice things have been written. I think every day there is some editorial, some op-ed is coming, and everybody is giving his views, what can be done. And I'm sure a lot can be done. There are so many areas in which nobody can believe in India that we became independent. That time we had 60,000 phone subscribers in this country. 60,000 in entire country. In March this year, we had 1.4 billion cell phone subscribers. You can see where we've gone. So this is a country which can, digital transformation, nobody can beat India nowadays. I mean, we have gone through, endured all the devastation and disruption and death of the COVID, but that time extensively used all these facilities which we have. The phone became the lifesaver. And then all these virtual summit, virtual diplomacy, virtual classes, everything was being done. So, Ambassador Shringla, I will not really delve in this subject for which we have invited you. Over to you.
Ambassador Surinder Kumar, President of the Indo-American Friendship Association, Dr. Denise Jorgens, Director of the International House, the University of Chicago, Dr. Anil Trivedi from the University of Chicago, ambassadors, members of the Diplomatic Corps, my senior colleagues, and I must in particular acknowledge Ambassador Rasgotra, the senior-most member of the Indian Foreign Service. It is a little overwhelming to have so many of my former bosses here with me this evening, but I'm so honored to have your presence. Dear friends, distinguished guests, well, let me begin by thanking the Indo-American Friendship Association and the University of Chicago for inviting me this evening to speak on the subject of India, the United States, and the G20 summit. I'm particularly happy to be speaking here as we mark the 90th anniversary of the founding of the International House of Chicago University, International House of Chicago University, whose main aim, I understand, and as Dr. Jorgens mentioned, is to promote cross-cultural understanding, mutual respect, and friendship among students and scholars. I would also like to commend the work done by Ambassador Kumar and the Indo-American Friendship Association in promoting an understanding of Indian foreign policy and the intricacies of the Indo-US relationship through sessions such as this. I must say over the past 2 or 3 years, I've been greatly benefited by my association with this association. Thank you, Ambassador Kumar. The theme, India, the United States, and the G20 summit, in my view, is a very appropriate one today. Of course, given the increasingly close and multifaceted ties between India and the US, and as India presides over the G20, one of the most influential groups of developed and developing economies, And it is, of course, for the first time that we are president of the G20. It's also perhaps one of the most significant international events that we have ever hosted. Ambassador Kumar referred to, I think, the NAM and CHOGM summits in 1983. 1983. I think one of the differences that we should note is that we've hosted summits which have been one-off events. We found with the G20 presidency that it's little more than a summit. It actually entails organizing 215 meetings of the G20 in different parts of our country. In our case, we've chosen 56 locations across our country to host G20 meetings. And that, in many senses, is a G20 record, because I don't believe any country in the past has ever hosted a presidency with so many different locations. China had 12 locations, Indonesia had 25, but I think with 56 locations, we've demonstrated not just our diversity and geographical spread, but also the importance of federalism and a cooperative federalism that we have in India today. But this theme, the theme of the topic today, also brings together two important threads in our foreign policy journey, one bilateral and the other multilateral. The bilateral relationship that we have with the United States is no doubt one of our most important. The G20 presidency and the priority that we attach to it is a substantive indication of the faith that India places in multilateralism. This is an opportunity for reflection on the journey that India has traveled as a nation in the past 75 years of its existence and its position in the world today. And it is also a measure of how far we have come, as Ambassador Kumar pointed out earlier, in this journey. Indeed, India and the US, the world's oldest and largest democracies working in tandem, is the need of the hour. As the world looks for solutions in what economists call the poly-crisis, we are all embroiled in. Many in this audience would recall a time when India-US ties were marred by deep-seated rancor and distrust. Our ties today, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has put it in his address to the US Congress in 2016, and I quote, "overcome the hesitations of history," unquote, and comfort, candor, and convergence define our conversations. The India-US strategic partnership is truly a partnership of trust, as our Prime Minister put it. Our shared values, common interests in many areas, including security, have strengthened the bonds of this trust. Our people-to-people relations and close economic ties also make our partnership unique. Friends, in the time that I spent in the US, one of the sentiments that often came up in conversations with the cross-section of Americans was, of course, the shared values and convergences that define our convergences and the relationship. And the first of these shared values is quite obviously democracy. Prime Minister Modi has referred to India as the mother of democracy. Democracy has been an integral part of our system from ancient times, as one can trace its evolution from the Vedas. There are ample records of the republics that existed in India as far back as the 6th century BC. It is that democracy ingrained in us that has made it possible for India to introduce universal adult franchise from the time of our independence in 1947. It is the same democracy that has taken strong roots in India when newly independent countries were falling to authoritarian and often anarchic forms of government. It is most fitting that our partner for this talk today is the University of Chicago. After all, it was in Chicago that an illustrious son of India, Swami Vivekananda, delivered one of the most evocative speeches on the value of tolerance, an integral component of a democratic ethos, at the World's Parliament of Religions in 1893. This is in the beautiful locale of the Institute of Arts. And of course, I think even today, if you go, you feel the aura of the place that Swami Vivekananda delivered that very critical and important seminal talk. And I quote selectively from Swami Vivekananda's speech when he said, "I'm proud to belong to a religion that has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. We believe not only in universal tolerance, but we accept all religions as true. I am proud to belong to a nation which has sheltered the persecuted and the refugees of all religions and all nations on earth." Unquote. Swami Vivekananda went on to cite examples of India offering refuge from religious persecution to Jewish and Zoroastrian communities, both of which are flourishing communities in India even today. Other shared values between India and the United States include respect for diversity, pluralism, and the rule of law. Coming to contemporary ties, I personally witnessed the growing convergence in strategic perspectives of India and the US over recent years. What are the main elements of this strategic perspective? And I will highlight it probably which are 10 defining areas of that relationship today. One, of course, is a very regular visits and dialogues extending to issues of regional and global importance. One of the aspects that I found quite, in many senses, very interesting was that many of our interlocutors in the US, in their conversations with us, always raised issues of regional and global interest, which transcended the bilateral. In most relationships, you tend to speak on issues that are bilateral, but in the United States, you spoke about issues that went beyond the bilateral. The India-US 2+2, that's 2+2 defense and foreign ministers dialogue, unthinkable a few decades ago, is one such example. Another striking characteristic of the relationship is its positive content and its forward-looking character. India and the United States both believe in being a part of the solution rather than the problem, and in the power of technology to improve the human condition. Second is the healthcare sector, which is an example of how deep and intertwined our partnership is. The COVID-19 pandemic gave us an impetus, to our existing health relationship. Collaborations in therapeutics, vaccines, emergency medical supplies have been critical. Last year, India and the US signed a health pact that has opened a new chapter in advancing this partnership. Three, India-US technology cooperation has transformative potential. Indian and American researchers and engineers in the academic space, in big tech giants, and in the startup space are working together in some of the most exciting fields of technology. We work together in generating breakthroughs and understanding in knowledge and applications, such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 5 and 6G, space, and semiconductors. The transformative potential of this partnership and in its impact is evident in the launch in May last year of the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, which is called ISET, which will forge closer links between government, academia, and industry. 4, energy, a more recent area of cooperation. This is one of the areas we worked in developing in the US, and I recall that when the Prime Minister visited the United States, he visited Houston in October 2019. He met all the major global oil companies, and this also resulted in a MOU that we signed, which involved investing in developing infrastructure in the US's LNG industry, which I think has been a very, which has provided a very good return on investment, considering that we import more than 7.3% of our crude oil requirement from the US, and this also extends to liquefied natural gas. Total energy imports from the US will be worth about $13.5 billion, and the US is well placed to meet India's market demand as it looks to transition to a gas-based economy. 5, this conversation will not be complete without a reference to climate change. At the 2015 Paris Climate Change Summit, India pledged that 40% of its power would come from non-fossil fuel sources by the year 2030. That target was met last year, a good 9 years ahead of schedule. India offers a huge market to the US since we have embarked on a definitive transition plan with the right mix of energy sources to reduce emissions. You may recall the India-US Climate and Clean Energy Partnership signed in 2021, which focused on mobilizing finance and speeding clean energy deployment. The Climate Action and Finance Mobilization Dialogue is one of the 2 main tracks of the US-India Agenda 2030 partnership. India's role and leadership is vital in combating climate change globally, and partnering the US is an important part of that effort. 6, one of the most indispensable pillars of our partnership is our economic relationship. Ambassador Kumar referred to that. In 2021, our bilateral trade crossed $160 billion, and the US became our second largest foreign investor in India, with foreign inflows of direct investment increasing in 2020 from $3.4 billion in the previous year to $13.82 billion, a $10 billion jump in a matter of a year. In 2022, 18% of India's total foreign direct investment flows came from the United States, which is about $11 billion. There are more than 200 Indian companies in the United States, creating jobs and enhancing the competitiveness of the US economy, particularly in the IT and digital sectors. There are also a very large number of US companies which are based in India, and I think there is a two-way economic exchange that is only increasing. 7, a word about some of our emerging partnerships, such as the Quad and the US-initiated Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. When we talk about the Quad, of course, without going into details because we are already familiar with them, I think our leaders have committed to address contemporary priorities in the region, in the Indo-Pacific region, such as combating COVID, climate change, infrastructure and connectivity, supply chain resilience, critical and emerging technologies. We see the Quad as a force for global good and in enhancing our own principles and values when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, a free, open, transparent Indo-Pacific region. And of course, when it comes to the Indo-Pacific economic cooperation, this has several pillars. One of the pillars is supply chain resilience, which we are working closely with the US on. And of course, the importance of the IPF is that it also includes Australia and Japan, our 2 Quad partners. So there is an economic partnership, there's a strategic partnership, and I think there is, in many senses, an effort to work with the US and with our other partners on the Indo-Pacific in a very comprehensive approach. 8, no mention of the US-India partnership is complete without talking about the defense relationship. India is diversifying its defense procurement, and India's defense hardware imports from the US today are worth $21 billion, considering that it was about a decade and a half ago, there was no imports from the US. I think this is quite significant. The government and Prime Minister Modi has invited the US to invest and partner with us under the Make in India and the Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is a self-sufficient, self-reliant India program, which can be of mutual benefit to both countries. A measure of the closeness that the 2 countries have achieved in the defense and security sphere can be gauged from the fact that the US Military Sea Lift Command, there was a ship called the USNS Charles Drew, which underwent repair at a private dockyard in Chennai. This is the first time a US ship has actually undergone repairs in India. From our side, an Indian naval ship to commemorate 75 years of our independence visited San Diego, the naval shipyard there, and this is the first time an Indian warship has visited the west coast of the United States. 9, education, which has been a major factor in bilateral ties. In fact, it precedes many other spheres of cooperation, with many generations of Indians choosing the United States as their destination of choice for higher studies for decades. Today, there are over 200,000 Indian students in the US, mostly in STEM areas. And the 2 sides are looking forward to launch the India-US Education and Skill Development Working Group. I do believe that the recent decision of the government of India to open or to allow foreign university campuses to be established in India would lead to enhanced India-US collaborations in the higher education sector. In other words, this has been a long-standing demand, and we find that with reputed universities, especially from the United States, being invited to actually set up campuses in India, this could be in many senses a game changer. And 10, among all the elements of the India-US partnership, the most vital is the people-to-people connect. needless to say, I think most of us who've been in the US have always seen the Indian diaspora, the Indian community as being the most important, I would say, instrument that you have, or the leverage that you have in dealing or in promoting that relationship and that partnership. And it has always been a catalyst in cementing closer ties between India and the United States. And we've always valued that relationship and always, I think, depended on it to take that relationship to the next higher level. Now, looking over the next 25 years as we move on to Amrit Kal or Viksit Bharat, which is our ambition of becoming a developed country by 2047, in the 100th year of our anniversary, what is it that we can do to take that relationship, this vital relationship, forward to the level that we want to? One, of course, is that as we develop free trade agreements with our trusted partners, Australia, the UAE, European Union, UK, I think it's important that we conclude a similar agreement with the United States. I'm talking about an area that we want to aspire to do, not something that we can do today. But certainly we have had extensive discussions with the US, and when I was there, a lot of our energy went into concluding a free trade agreement. So we have the elements of an agreement when the time is correct. With the huge degree of trust and interoperability in the defense sector, we must look at elevating ties to the next level. And one of the ways to achieve it, as I mentioned earlier, is to undertake joint production, manufacture of defense equipment for supplying not only within India, but to new markets across the region. I did mention about the transformative effect that Indo-US collaborations and innovations in cutting-edge technologies can have. The two countries need to work together to forge partnerships in innovation that can lead the way for the next 25 years of our and global cooperation in this area. US investments have contributed to the success of our startup sector. India today has started with a handful, but today has not only close to 1,000 unicorns, but also decacorns, which is companies that have reached $10 billion in market capitalization. And US companies are increasingly investing in R&D in India. This cooperation can be upscaled with greater emphasis on joint research and development of new technologies. It has, again, I repeat, the potential to become one of the engines of global innovation. As I earlier mentioned, people-to-people ties have the potential and is our most valuable resource with a strong interest in contributing to enhancing the relationship. And nurturing these ties, I think, is critical, and we should strive to facilitate easier mobility for students and skilled workers, fostering new educational linkages with a focus on online course and content and skilling, and ways to enhance the quality of our people-to-people ties. Some of it is already happening as we speak, but I think what we're talking about is easier movement of professionals, of services, and this is in the mutual interests of both countries. So coming now to the G20, and Ambassador Kumar did emphasize on the, speaking on our presidency of the G20, what are our priorities as we go on, as we take over the stewardship of this influential body. Of course, we've completed 1 month of that presidency. We've organized 6 meetings in cities across the country, and we are gearing up to organize, as I said, another 200 meetings in the coming 8 or 9 months before the summit in September this year. What is the context in which we are resuming presidency? I think it's important. Coming out of the COVID crisis, we are seeing ourselves as a resilient economy with a 7% growth projection, probably one of the fastest rates of growth of an emerging economy, of a major emerging economy. We are also commemorating the 75th anniversary of our independence and getting into, as I mentioned, Amrit Kal, which is the next 25 years until we attain 100 years of our independence. We have a stated ambition to become a developed country in the next 25 years. And of course, I think in that context, we have to look at how we see things globally as well. At the global level, obviously, I would say coming on the devastation of the COVID pandemic. You have the Ukraine conflict. And this, of course, has had an impact not only on those that are closest to the conflict, but even those that are very far away from the conflict. Many of the developing countries today are facing the impact of higher import bills for food and fuel. At the same time, they're seeing lower revenues from decreasing international demand for goods and services, and lower remittances for many countries, many developing countries that rely on remittances, tourism, etc., for their income. And according to the UNCTAD, in the last couple of years, government debt levels as a share of GDP increased in over 100 developing countries. So I'm told 90 developing countries are on the edges of indebtedness, and as we go on to organize what we call a summit of the Global South in the next few days, it would be important for us to gauge the thinking of the developing world and to factor that thought into our presidency of the G20 and to see what this means. But this is, come back to the relationship again, an important moment for India and the United States to work together as we work with all of our G20 partners to bring about positive change at a global level. And the G20, from our perspective, the G20 consists of countries which are G7 members. All BRICS countries are represented. It also has all 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. It has within its structures multilateral organizations like the UN, IMF, World Bank, the OECD, the African Union, the ASEAN are all members, are all inherent in that membership. And so when the G20 actually takes decisions, it really has a consensual approach because of the depth and the breadth of the G20, but also its significance in terms of trade, GDP, etc. But what is important, of course, is to ensure that you have the building blocks that enable you to take the decisions that are important in this very, very critical moment. And I do believe that many of our partners, many of the countries that look upon India as the voice of the global south, as our Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, has put it, really do depend on the G20 and on the current presidency to bring about that change that is required to provide solutions to global challenges that beset the world today. And many countries do believe that India, as a country that has undertaken transformative changes in its development, in its ability for inclusive financing, renewable energy across the board, that has changed the lives of hundreds of millions of its citizens, can offer the solutions to some of those challenges that we see. So we are happy to reproduce some of these platforms that we have created, some of the work that we have done with our other partners, with the United States, with the UK, with the European Union, with all of our other partners in taking this at scale to the rest of the world, providing solutions in areas that are, I would say, today difficult. Now, what are our priorities, broad priorities? One, of course, is accelerated, sustainable, inclusive growth. Countries across the globe want to see momentum in their economic development and growth, of course, is a key component of that. So we are going to focus on how we can bring about this level of growth. We also believe that the Sustainable Development Goals, which I think we are in the middle of that process, has faltered. How do we add momentum to the SDGs? How do we take that forward? Needless to say, with our key strength in the IT sector, we will focus on the digital architecture, making it inclusive during our presidency. So information technology becomes a catalyst of socio-economic transformation. Energy transitions are important for countries across the globe for accelerating low-carbon growth. And this is, again, going to be a priority. How do we bring about a Green Development Compact? How do we work with other countries to ensure that the commitments that we make under our climate change priorities will be achievable? And we do believe that that would require both climate financing and a level of climate justice, as we call it. And of course, one of the ways we do believe is not just through climate action, but also to change our lifestyles and the way we live. The UN Secretary General was here recently, did point out, he said we are living at 1.6 times that the world can sustain. In other words, we are living lives that are unsustainable. And so we need to lead sustainable lifestyles, and India has offered a template in the lifestyle for environment by which we can lead sustainable lifestyles, sustainable consumption, sustainable production is one of the SDGs, SDG 12, and how can we take that forward? So this is a priority in our presidency. When we talk about priorities, women-led development is also a very, very important priority for us, and we will work with our partners to see how we can take that forward. The G20 structure is government to government, but it also includes a number of engagement groups which are non-governmental in nature, which then support. These are groups that are broad-based and then support the overall, I would say, recommendations that emerge from any presidency and any G20 exercise. We, of course, do believe that we need to look at both the food and energy crisis that is a concern for many countries across the globe, and we need to boost cooperation. I did mention indebtedness. A very large number of countries, including in our own neighborhood, are today facing acute crisis of debt, unsustainable debt burdens. One of the ways that we intend to deal with it is to see how we can reform some of the Bretton Woods institutions, so multilateral reform, reform of the IMF, the World Bank, for example, enhancing their mandate in cooperation with those organizations themselves. How can we give them a greater mandate to garner private sector financing, to look at blended financing? How can they support climate actions and through financing for climate technology, for example? How can they support indebted countries in a manner that is more, I would say, sustainable? The Bretton Woods institutions, we all know, have been created after the Second World War, have functioned well for their part for the first 50 years or so. But after the turn of the century, I would say rapid changes in the world, the demands, global demands on them have clearly, I would say, highlighted their limitations. And I think we need to work with the global community in seeing how we can enhance the mandate of these institutions to make them more effective and more, I would say, up to date in dealing with the crisis, with the problems and challenges of today's world. So democratization, reform of multilateral institutions, which have been a key theme of India's international discourse, is something that we hope to take up in our presidency as we go along. So we do believe that India's G20 presidency is an opportunity for the country and its 1.3 billion people to shape the global agenda at a time of increasing polarization, escalation of geopolitical tensions, to advance peace, stability, and shared prosperity. We also believe that our presidency theme of Vasudev Kutumbakam, which is a part of our ancient ethos, and but also reflects our current philosophy, one earth, one family, one future, is something that would provide the necessary, I would say, backdrop to the change that we would like to bring in with our partners in the G20. I'll stop here because I think there is a lot more that we can exchange when we have the Q&A session, but thank you very much for bearing with me. Thank you.
We have some minutes for asking questions. Let me recognize our friend, dear friend, Saeed Bhai, who has come here, Saeed Naqvi. Before I invite the question from floor, if you permit me, may I ask a question? how significantly the current state of relations between USA and Russia, USA and China, and now even USA and Saudi Arabia affect G20 as a group?
So I did mention, the polarizations. The G20, of course, there are advantages and disadvantages. One advantage is that it's an inclusive grouping. So it has countries from across the globe, north, south, east, and west. But also, it's also a grouping where the fault lines are quite evident in terms of the ideologies, in terms of the geographical divides that we see. So whether it's north or south or east or west, we see both convergences and divergences. And I think this has always been there. It's not new. But today, it's probably there in a more acute form. And of course, we need to live with that reality under our presidency. I think Indonesia, and Master Inas here, has done a marvelous job in taking the G20 forward, despite many of the challenges that have been there. And I do believe that, when the leaders got together in Bali, they did understand that there is a great amount of responsibility and expectation from the G20. And not coming out with outcomes and not being able to look at solutions that the world needs today is something that, in many senses, would be unforgivable, not just from the point of view of the reaction from other countries, but also from the point of view of opportunities lost and possibly greater polarizations that can take the world to a far more uncertain place than we are in today. Under our presidency, I think we would definitely focus on working on some of the broad priorities that I have outlined. That is part of our presidency. We'll work on achieving results that all countries within the G20 and outside want to see. So we want to focus on the convergences and avoid the divergences that are there. I don't think it matters, whether people stand together for a photograph or whether people have differences within the group. What is important is that as a group, we come out with solutions that, or at least strive towards achieving solutions that are today the hour of the very much needed in terms of the global situation. So our policy will be, I think, to bring people together, and I think we are already working in that endeavor.
Thank you. I have some indications from floor already. Swasini Haidar, the National Editor of Hindu. Mike, please.
Thanks so much, Mr. Shringla. And I just wanted to possibly take forward what Ambassador Surendra Kumar had asked you about. You said that it doesn't matter whether leaders come together for the summit, but has the G20 not been diluted by the fact that the 20 leaders of the summit can no longer seem to occupy the same space, if you like? Do you think, in a sense, the G20 itself is in some trouble, faces a sort of extinction, since you can't bring everyone together? And just as a part of that, will we see the kind of diplomacy in the next few months, as we did see with the Indonesian president traveling to Moscow, traveling to Kiev, ensuring that both sides of the Ukraine conflict divide were invited to the G20? Are we likely to see the same?
Well, just to clarify, I didn't say that we didn't see the leaders, or we didn't want the leaders to come to the summit. I said that it didn't matter if the leaders didn't pose for a photograph, if people didn't pose for a photograph together. As it happens, the leaders did pose for the photograph. But the point I'm making is that it's not the symbolic actions that we're looking for. It's the substance of the meetings that are important. And in that endeavor, I think we will strive to focus on, as I said, the convergences, try to focus on outcomes that the world so much requires of the G20. With regard to initiatives, you've seen the Prime Minister has spoken that this is not an era of war, that India believes in peace, diplomacy and dialogue are the only ways out. The Prime Minister also spoke to both President Putin and President Zelensky. And as far as we are concerned, anything that we can do to ensure that there is, an atmosphere under which we can, I would say, conduct our business to take forward the larger agenda, I think which is peace and stability. I think that is, our priority.
On left to Swasini, Dr. Awad, you wanted to say something. Ask a question, no comments, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. Mr. Shringla, I just wanted to put the Indian point of view in respect to the no end of the crisis in Russia-Ukraine war and the rising tension in Asia-Pacific. Do you see the G20 seriously is relevant in solving problems? Thank you.
So let's understand where the G20 comes from. The G20 started first as a grouping of finance ministers. It later was elevated to that of head of state and government. Primarily, I think, focused on macroeconomic growth and stability. Leaders came together to look at solutions that can address the economic issues of the day. Of course, since then, the mandate and the scope of the G20 has broadened significantly. In fact, it was Prime Minister Modi who called for an extraordinary summit under Saudi Arabian presidency to deal with the COVID crisis. And at that time, he mentioned that we should go for human-centric globalization, that the G20 should work on a human-centric globalization, that we need to look at issues that are beyond just the economic and financial issues. And the G20 did come up with solutions. I mean, after all, the debt service suspension initiative that was decided under Saudi presidency ensured that developing countries that were indebted due to the COVID crisis had a moratorium on the repayment of interest and debts until the end of 2021. So it has been successful even in the time of difficulty in coming up with solutions. Both under the Italian presidency and the Indonesian presidency, we achieved outcomes that were quite admirable and came up with many, I would say, decisions that took forward global agenda. I think what is needed is really to accelerate that level of outcomes and to take that forward in a manner that really is the requirement of today's situation and circumstances.
Veteran journalist, editor, and the member of IAFA Advisory Council, Kalyani Shankarji.
Thank you, Ambassador Shringla, for the wonderful presentation. My question is very brief. You see, the success of any summit is the result. So the result will not be known tomorrow. So in view of the, real thing that both in India and the US, both will have elections scheduled in 2024. So how much do you think, how much are you hoping to achieve the implementation of whatever resolutions you had taken? And this year, of course, even in India, we will have all the attention on the summit. But then next year, soon after that, I think the attention will be moving towards the elections. The same, already in the US, they have started talking about the 2024 elections, and the candidates have already announced their names. So how much are you hopeful on this? Thank you.
Well, as any presidency, we would look to our mandate, which would end in this year itself. In other words, our mandate is to do what we can within our presidency and happily pass on the baton to Brazil, which will then take on the presidency. Of course, in democracies, electoral cycles are unavoidable and democracies do get distracted. But we do hope that countries like Brazil and then South Africa will continue to take forward the agenda that started in Indonesia, and we will definitely work on that agenda and then take it forward. We have a unique conjuncture in which 4 developing countries would hold the presidency of the G20 successively, and I think that really gives us an opportunity to provide a much broader, I would say, broader outlook in terms of both the scope and the results that we can look forward to under our presidency.
10 years back, upstairs, I had a discussion, can G20 be more effective than the UN? And one of the panelists was Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia. This discussion was chaired by Ambassador K.S. Bajpai, who is not anymore with us. Ambassador of Mexico was also there. So we have again Ambassador Bhatia here. Shoot your question, please.
Thank you very much, Surendra. Mainly the question is about G20. We are just a day or so away from the Global South Summit that India is hosting in the digital format. 120 nations have been invited. Are you in a position to share a little bit more on what we are expecting to achieve from it? And if you do not mind, related to this is the first part of your talk, United States. You know that US hosted the African Leaders Summit in Washington recently. Are there some learnings for India from that US-Africa interaction? Thank you.
Well, the summit on the Global South, I think is, as I mentioned, we believe this is very important today in the context of understanding what the developing world is thinking and what the developing world wants in terms of global actions. You know, when we, as we are president of the G20, it's important on us as an important member of the Global South to take into account the views and the aspirations of the developing world. So I think one of the main objectives is to try and get a sense of the thinking in the developing world at the highest levels. And I would say, you know, united in voice, united in action. In other words, I mean, how can the Global South come together on many of its, I would say, priorities that are common in nature? And if you see our own priorities under our presidency, many of those reflect, I would say, the aspirations of the Global South, but we want to get that in more micro detail and understand in more, in more, I would say, granular terms, what this is, what this means. As far as the US-Africa Summit is concerned, I think, you know, the US is an important partner even when it comes to our outreach to Africa. We've worked with the US, we've worked with many other countries, we've worked with the UK as well, European Union, in dealing with you know, many of the partnerships in Africa. So under our presidency of the G20, Africa will be a very major focus area. I think I really need to look at it, but I think we have invited one of the largest representations from Africa ever in a G20 presidency, with 6 African members represented in our G20 presidency. Besides the 3 that would come in the normal course, we've also invited Nigeria, we've invited Egypt, and we've invited Mauritius. And so that makes a total of 6 African members represented under our presidency. And I think that in many senses would give a sense of the priority that we attach to Africa and the G20's focus in Africa. And it's not unusual, because if you remember, even under German presidency, the focus was on Africa. Many presidencies have tried to orient the G20 to look towards Africa, and ours will be no different. I mean, we will be taking into account, as I said, the aspirations of the developing world, and of course, Africa is an important part of that.
Last question, Vijay Naik.
Ambassador Shringla, your speech was excellent and very comprehensive, but I didn't find a reference to terrorism. You talked of security, but you didn't say anything, a word on terrorism, number one. What is the outcome of India and US cooperation so far as terrorism is concerned, according to you? Whether this will be, anything can be discussed on terrorism in G20, and the US is going closer to Pakistan now. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think in the relationship, when we talk about strategic convergences and the security partnership, terrorism is inherent in that. Our collaboration with the US on terrorism is a very important component of our bilateral partnership. This is an area that we have seen eye to eye. We have achieved huge successes in terms of what we have done in terms of sharing of information, in terms of sharing of best practices, in terms of also working on common goals. And that includes the multilateral arena. As you've seen, we have been successful in listing a very large number of terrorists under the 1267 and the Counterterrorism Committee of the UN. We've also, you saw that India has taken some very strong steps in counterterrorism, including the No Money for Terrorism conference that we hosted. But also for the first time, the Counterterrorism Committee of the UN Security Council actually came to India and held its meeting in India and to commemorate the 26/11, the heinous terrorist attacks on India from Pakistani soil and supported by Pakistani establishment. So I think the US fully supports us in that, whether it is the outcome of 26/11 in terms of the collaboration with regard to Headley and Rana and many of the other accused, but also in terms of all the other steps that we've taken under FATF and all the other organizations that we. So counterterrorism has been a regular part of our cooperation from, I would say, from the normative phase to the actual action-oriented phase in counterterrorism. We have worked closely together between our governments and our agencies, and that will continue to be a very important part of our relationship. As far as the G20 is concerned, there is no separate working group or engagement group that deals with counterterrorism, but it would come up undoubtedly. We would certainly give high priority to counterterrorism in the foreign ministers meeting at different levels where political issues are articulated. And I have no doubt that counterterrorism will become an important plank in our presidency, and it will be strongly supported by all G20 members.
Please give a big hand to Ambassador Shringla. And please remain seated. You have a lot surprises for you. Wait for surprises. Thank you.